You want to acknowledge, that is to say, the Air Force does not admit that it exists. This status has been maintained very carefully, particularly in the last few years. The puzzle is that the base has clearly been very active for quite a while, and you can see that there are about 700 to 1,000 people traveling from Las Vegas every day. So essentially the bulk of what has gone on there in the last 10 years has not emerged from the black.
This airplane the program was terminated. The airplanes were put in mothballs for 20 years before they admitted the existence of the aircraft. There's programs that they're working on today that are 50 years ahead of anything that you and I can even conceive of, and that we may never see the light of day.
Would you say it's America's most top secret military base?
As far as an operational test facility, it's probably the most secret test facility in the free world, yes.
So there is no question that the facility is there, that the government has said very little in the past about it. Now the real question, I suppose, is are there any flying saucers out there?
No one had associated flying saucers with Area 51 until Bob Lazar's interview hit television screens around the world. He said that he worked at an underground facility called S4. The top secret project was codenamed Galileo.
They would call it a specific time. For instance, the operator would say, "Mr. Lazar, it's now 4:15 a.m. We expect you to be at McCarran Airport at 4:45. Your plane will be leaving at such and such time." I'd drive there, check in, board the plane, and the plane would fly out to Groom Lake. It would land there. I'd get off the plane and wait, and there would be a bus to take me and whoever else was going to S4, Papoose Lake, which is about 15 miles south of there, and then I would check in at S4.
Tell me about how you felt on your very first trip out.
The first trip out there it was actually very exciting because it seemed so cloak and dagger to me, especially after I got in the bus with the blacked out windows. I kind of thought that was neat. Drove out to the site, and then it was checked in, guards walking around with guns, and I was sure what I was working on was going to be pretty fascinating.
He says that within a few days of working out at S4, he was shown an actual flying disc in one of the hangars.
When I was brought in by bus, and for the first time, one of the hangar doors, the one on the end, was open. The bus drove up and we stopped there, and clear as day in the hangar, taking up almost all the hangar, was the disc. Looked like something right out of a science fiction movie. And as I walked in there, I thought, well, this is the new advanced aircraft we've been working on, and this is why people keep seeing flying saucers, because it's ours and we've just been testing it probably for all these years.
And what color and size was that?
It was a dull stainless steel, pewter gray, very unimpressive color-wise. About 52.8 feet in diameter and about 16 feet high.
So was it actually a recovered craft that you were working on, or was it one that scientists had built as a mock-up of a recovered craft?
Well, whether it was recovered, given, or what, it was not built as a mock-up. It was an alien craft built on another world. There was absolutely no doubt about that.
Lazar claims that he was one of only 22 people who had something called majestic clearance to work on the craft itself.
The whole aim of the project was to take these craft, or the one in particular that I was working on, and try and duplicate its systems and subsystems with earthly materials. The work that I did basically entailed back engineering the power and propulsion system. And I opted to start with the power, the reactor that ran the craft.
I knew immediately if his credentials could be verified, if even part of his story could be verified, it'd be one tremendous expose.
George Knapp was a long-standing TV reporter. He'd heard enough of the UFO rumors over the years to appreciate how big a scoop this could be if Lazar was telling the truth.
He gave me information about his background, educational background and employment background. I started with his claim to have worked at Los Alamos Lab. We went to Los Alamos and got nothing even close to cooperation. They wouldn't respond to our phone calls. They say, we have no information on Bob Lazar. There's nothing in the files. I said, are you sure now? No, nothing in the files. I showed them the phone book entry that Bob had kept that said he was there. I showed them the newspaper article that showed that he was there. Basically, Los Alamos Lab tried to thwart me at every step. Were completely uncooperative in trying to get information about Bob, and I found that to be the case at every step of the way in trying to verify his background.
Thursday, 12:37 p.m.
Former NASA mission specialist Bob Exler had heard about Area 51 and Groom Lake when he worked on the Apollo and Space Shuttle projects. He was intrigued by Lazar's claims and started to investigate.
I did a variety of research relative to Bob Lazar. I actually met him. I obtained a copy of his, what they call a W-2 form, which is one of the IRS documents associated with pay. His particular form indicated that he worked for the U.S. Department of Naval Intelligence. They informed me that it was a genuine document. It was not something that had been fabricated. There were a variety of numbers, contract numbers and so forth issued on the document, which I was able to research, again finding that these were highly classified numbers. In fact, Internal Revenue Service ran into a brick wall when it came to trying to track down the actual employer associated with the document. And then again, with the Social Security Administration, we found that Bob Lazar's records had in fact been bleached clean. There was nothing there, in spite of the fact that the document clearly indicated that Social Security taxes had been taken out of his pay.
Not everyone who's researched Bob Lazar believes his claims. Stanton Friedman is one of the most respected authors in the UFO field today. He's a former nuclear physicist with top secret clearance and has many friends and contacts in the Black Project world.
I've looked at considerable depth into Bob Lazar's claims, both about himself and about propulsion system. Those are fairly elaborate claims. I've talked to the schools that he claims to have received degrees from. I've checked on his high school record. I talked to Los Alamos Lab where he was supposedly a scientist and so forth. I have come up totally empty. Now, when a guy lies like that, you get very wary. And, you know, it has all the trimmings, his story, of a Walter Mitty story. Somebody in his imagination was, you know, stronger, brighter, faster than anybody else. I don't doubt that he did some work at Los Alamos and other places. He's clever. He drives a jet-powered car, fixes radiation detectors. So he may have performed some service. But I can find no reason to think that he worked out there on a flying saucer.
I mean, I had to wonder whether this guy was making this stuff up, but then I see the phone book and I see the newspaper article, and I talked to people who worked with Bob at the lab and who said, in fact, that he did work on classified projects, yet no one can find any records of his background.
The people that I worked with, colleagues, the people I went to school with, obviously knew I was there, and people at Los Alamos, I was friends with, and people that worked under me and alongside of me knew I was there and, you know, cooperate what was going on. But, you know, officially, it's very difficult to get information for the people in charge.
To further prove his claims, Lazar agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed.
The thing that is interesting about polygraph is that if you're embellishing or if you don't completely believe what you're saying, it is very, very easy to detect. All it really will tell you is that the individual believes with 100% conviction that what he's reporting is exactly as he recalls and as he believes it to be. And that clearly was the case with Bob Lazar. Now, could his perception have been a bit askew? Yes, that's possible, but he clearly wasn't lying.
I think Bob is even open to the possibility that perhaps he had been used in some sort of misinformation or disinformation campaign. I mean, look at him. He has a pirate flag floating on his house. He races jet cars. He likes fast women. He likes guns. He's technically capable, so in that sense, he may be perfect for this kind of a program. Technically capable, scientifically knowledgeable, and yet completely discreditable at a moment's notice. If you wanted to test public reaction to a story about Area 51 and then suddenly discredit it afterwards, Bob may have been the most qualified person in the country.
Lazar says that on one occasion he was escorted into the flying disc that he saw in the hangar to analyze its propulsion system.
It was obviously made to be piloted by something smaller than the average human being, very cramped in there.
What were the size of these seats that were in there?
The seats were very small. I'd say about 1/3 to 1/4 the size of a normal human seat. A lot of people say, boy, it must have been exciting to go in there, and I always say it wasn't. It was a very ominous feeling. I know it sounds silly, but it's so unearthly in there.
You have spoken to someone who's actually seen a UFO under a tarpaulin at Area 51.
I have. I've spoken to several people who've seen UFOs or disc-shaped craft out there. There was a woman who was a secretary for a major defense contractor at the Nevada test site who worked on nuclear programs, who told me that she had sat in on conversations between military and civilian contractors at which the Roswell case had been discussed, at which it had been discussed taking some Roswell material to Area 51. The level of secrecy during those meetings was great. Afterward, they'd take the ribbons out of the typewriter she was typing on. She was ready to tell me about this, and I had this conversation with her on the phone. The next day after this conversation takes place, she's visited by two men who say that they work for the company she used to work for, reminding her that she is still under a security oath. Told her, we know that you do a lot of traveling back and forth, a lot of long drives between Las Vegas and LA. We'd hate for something to happen to you or your family. No interview. I mean, it happened again and again and again. Same scenario.
Lazar says that in addition to being shown inside the disc, he actually saw it take off from the lake bed.
I was brought into the hangar for one of the short duration tests, and the craft was already outside on the lake bed, and that was pretty much of a marvelous sight. It's a huge thing. It's like seeing a house lift off the ground. You can't imagine the energy involved to do that. Because of the extremely high energy output and the fact that the outside of the craft is used as a conductor, that does ionize the air. And the crafts do, as a byproduct of this, glow at night, much like a fluorescent tube will light up. So, you know, bright, strange jumping lights in the sky. That does explain that.
Would you categorically say there is no way that humans could have built the craft that you saw?
Absolutely. I will categorically deny that. Well, I don't know. How exactly should I put that? I guess I can just say it straight out. There is no way that any government on this earth could produce that craft, period. And I defy anyone to argue that point.
One of the big questions that's hung over this whole story is whether Lazar saw a man-made flying disc and not an alien spacecraft.
A lot of these craft which are being developed in secrecy in the United States are tested at night, and one can imagine that seen through kind of half-closed eyes, something like an F-117 stealth fighter or a B-2 bomber, side-on or front-on, would look remarkably like, say, a flying saucer or a UFO.
You see an F-117, or you see Tacit Blue, or you see a B-2. Particularly if you see it from some fairly unusual angle, you're going to have a very hard time relating that to conventional aircraft. Some of these things can look very strange indeed. So, you know, an unusual but decidedly terrestrial aircraft can certainly present the appearance of a disk from many angles.
I think for anyone who's been out into the western United States and seen the kind of place it is and let their imaginations run riot a bit, it is possible to imagine in these vast test areas technologies which are highly exotic, highly revolutionary, and would change the way we feel about science today. However, to say that that is alien science derived from beyond this world, I think is something which is just, it is unbelievable. It's too much to absorb.
Do you think that some of the truth certainly lies out there in the middle of the Nevada desert at Groom Lake?
I would expect that some of the truth may very well lie out in the desert near Groom Lake. It's the right place for some of it to be. It's isolated, it's under control, it's high security. I don't think we've yet scratched the surface on what's happening out there with regard to flying saucers.
According to Lazar, the craft that they were secretly testing out in the desert at night used an exotic anti-gravity propulsion system.
The reactor itself was an incredibly advanced system. This was an antimatter reactor. This is something we could only dream of having, something that could put out huge amounts of power that rivals several nuclear power plants running at capacity. What happens is a great gravity distortion is created, and you're essentially bending space toward the craft. The craft becomes part of that space, and then when the reactors, or when the gravity amplifiers are shut down, the craft is essentially where it was focused. It's a very difficult thing to grasp. It happens virtually instantaneously because of the fact that gravity distorts time. And if you're bending space and time along with it, when you wind back up in that place, you're there between the ticks of a clock.
Looking at nighttime video films out in the test site area, we've seen video of craft that were luminous, that would move across the sky as if it was skipping a stone across water, or sort of a sewing machine effect. What we see across the screen are a series of lights, of dashes of light, as the object moves from point A to point B. Therefore, we are seeing what you might call a shadow effect of the propulsion mechanism at work.
Bob Lazar is not the only person who's come forward and claimed to have worked out at the base on flying discs. Former US Marines test pilot Bill Uhouse worked out at Groom Lake and other top-secret locations for more than 40 years, working for the Pentagon and civilian contractors on a variety of highly classified projects, including, he says, a flying disc recovered from a crash in Kingman, Arizona in May 1953. He said that he'd been cleared to do this interview and to discuss certain information, but asked us not to show his face.
What were you actually working on out there?
One of the things I worked on was a flying disc simulator. It was designed in New Mexico by a separate staff that built it in parallel with the actual craft that they had intended to fly. The purpose of the simulator was to train pilots to fly this strange-looking craft. The simulator was a 10-meter round disc. The skin was made of boron composite material, not unlike that you see on the F-117.
How did you know how to build a simulator?
Essentially, there weren't any plans. The plans were generated as we constructed it. And it was a process there that took quite a while for us to even understand the concept way back in the 50s.
Uhouse says that Lazar did work at Area 51.
I think Bob is saying exactly what he knows, and I know a little bit about Bob from a different standpoint than a lot of the people know and what's been written about him, but Bob Lazar is not lying as far as his place and position and the activity he was involved with at the time, although some of it, he couldn't recall, but there's a lot of reasons why Bob was hired, number one. Here's the thing. Take a guy like Bob, send him out there, somebody said, aliens, blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden you're thinking about 9 alien crafts. They may have not been 9 alien crafts.
Bravo 7014, contact departure, good day.
Do you believe that the government has recovered alien spacecraft?
I have no doubts whatsoever that the United States has actually recovered a number of extraterrestrial vehicles.
And what do they do with them?
I think that since 1947, there have been efforts to try and duplicate the technology, what is referred to as reverse engineering. And I don't know how far they've got, but some reports indicate that we've actually been test flying within a limited area actual alien vehicles or terrestrial vehicles, United States vehicles which have been made using alien technology.
Could these not just be military aircraft?
Well, I think it's quite possible some of them are military aircraft, I've heard from very reliable sources, including a leading specialist on unmanned aerial vehicles, that we have developed some disc-shaped platforms for aerial reconnaissance, some quite small, maybe some larger, which are being utilized by the Americans and have been built by the Americans.
That's 6389 Delta, Las Vegas Tower, runway 1 on the left taxi into position and hold traffic crossing downfield. Thank you, sir. 89 Delta.
Was it a hard secret to keep?
It was a virtually impossible secret to keep, but I did play by the rules, and it caused a lot of problems. It caused problems in my family life. I mean, imagine being married at the time, and you know, you get a call, you know, perhaps at night, and a strange voice on the phone. Okay, you disappear, you can't tell your wife who it was on the phone, where you're going, and you come back, you know, sometime early in the morning. I mean, what is she gonna think?
Unaware of where he was going every day and being absent from home for long periods, Bob's relationship with his wife had deteriorated badly. This was seen as a potential security risk out of the base.
My wife was having an affair with someone else, so they viewed that as a potential emotional instability, and they no longer wanted me coming out until things were cleared up, either for it, you know, it to break up or heal or whatever. But they, that's what put the brakes on everything there.
And did they then stop calling you? Did you get very frustrated like that?
Yeah, then I began to wonder, boy, now they've given me all this information and everything's come to a dead stop. What's going on? And that's when I began to be concerned, and then that's when I said, you know, now it's becoming important that some other people know what was going on.
As the silence turned from days to weeks, he finally decided to tell his wife and closest friends just what he'd been doing.
Were you aware of the security implications?
I was quite aware of what could happen, but I was also aware that these guys would go to any extent to keep their secret, and certainly not have someone that was on the inside running around. And I didn't think it was beyond them at all to make me disappear, whether, I mean, who knows? I know it sounds more like a movie, but I didn't think it was beyond their capability to kill me, just to stop the word from getting out.
Bob knew the test flight schedule for the discs and took his wife, his best friend Gene Huff, and another friend John Lear out to the desert near the base on a Wednesday night in March 1989.
Huh, it started coming in too.
How far away can that thing pick up stuff if it's like overhead, like up in the air?
Overhead, 300 miles.
So it could be anywhere in the crash plane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that sounds military to me. Yeah, I bet you that's what this is. We got. Oh.
You see that?
Whoa. Yeah, what was that? Did you see that light just come on over there?
That just.
I was looking right at it.
Yeah.
Here, let me check it out.
Oh, that was a shooting star.
Right above it was a meteor too. No, there was a steady light.
No, it's a steady light that just came
without
on.
any kind of.
No, this one right over the range here. It wasn't there, and then I was looking right there, and it blinked on.
That's very bright. That's brighter than a star.
Yeah. Huh? Doesn't look like landing lights.
We got the line clear now, sir. We figured out what the problem is, and whatever that heading is, we're ready for it.
Huh? Interesting.
Okay, just change course.
Oh.
White light?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's coming at us.
What did you see when you were out there?
Shortly after the flight time that I had recorded, white light came up. Well, not a white light, it was actually more of an amber light. Came up off the ground and hovered, and then began doing radical step maneuvers and darting from one side of the sky to the other, doing some impossible flight characteristics.
Do you think what you saw over the desert that night was an alien spacecraft?
Could I identify it as an ET craft without Bob's help? No, it would have been and you know, like I said, an elliptically shaped saucer doing, you know, just doing moves that we're not capable of, but I could not say that, no, this wasn't some advanced Earth technology.
We got the launch clear now, sir. We figured out what the problem is, and whatever that heading is, we're ready for it.
That would be a UFO. It's not blinking, it's not conforming to any sort of FAA lighting regulations, and there you're looking at it. That's like a typical UFO. If it was red, it would be real typical, because that's what most people report, is red lights like that are solid colored. I don't think that's landing lights because it's curved already and we're still looking at it. Looks like he's curving back. Here he comes. That is a typical military UFO. There you go.
This small group went back to see 2 more Wednesday night flight tests, but on the 3rd trip, they were spotted, caught, and arrested. Bob was taken to Indian Springs Air Force Base and interrogated.
That interrogation was about as intense as you can possibly get. Right, stopping short of shooting me in the head.
What were they saying to you?
Everything up to and including that, you know, we can absolutely kill you right now and there'd be no one looking for you at all. And I mean, everything. They threatened my wife. They threatened to kill my wife. They said they'd stop at nothing. They said they thought they made that very clear. They couldn't believe that I had taken anyone out there to show them that, much less left with information like that.